Hello, lovely listeners, and welcome back to the Red Rabbit Hole. You've come back again, and we're all here again, aren't we, Nicky?
We are. I'm always here, as I keep saying.
It's really going to shock me one day if I call for you and you're not there. I'll be like, it'll be like little echoes rolling around the rabbit hole.
There's a little
Nicky!
message that says, Nicky is unavailable today. Please leave a message after the tone.
Beep, Nicky! Don't leave me alone. Well, I wouldn't worry. I wouldn't worry this week because we have another wonderful guest with us.
We do. You're not alone.
I'm not alone. We have dragged yet another author down to the depths of the Red Rabbit Hole with us in the form of LJ Shepherd. Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming. And you're going to talk to us a little bit about the rabbit holes that you jumped down writing your book, The Trials of Lila Dalton.
Yeah, there are many and plentiful rabbit holes for sure.
Well, I think one of the biggest might be Lila is a barrister and you're a barrister.
Yeah, albeit what I will say about that, it's sort of funny that I'm on this podcast because writing a legal thriller was really a way of me trying to avoid doing any research.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
But then again, that is the deepest of rabbit holes, really. I'd say when you were thinking, what career path shall I take in readiness for the future book that I'm going to write?
I tell you though, avoidance with research is one of the biggest time sucks because you might as well just do it in the end. Because if you try and avoid trying to like look up facts or figures or anything like that, then you just end up going back to it regardless. So all your editors will make you check stuff. I always think, oh, I'm just going to do it, but then I end up, as we've always said, down those horrible little rabbit holes that it takes ages to escape from. And it sounds like you did go through a lot of rabbit holes.
Yeah. So just to sort of set out a bit of background about the book, it follows a barrister, Lila, who comes around in a courtroom. 12 people are looking at her, but she has no understanding of why she's there or who she is. And the reason for that is she has no memories of anything before that moment. She quickly realises that the 12 people are a jury. She's a barrister, and her job is to defend the person in the dock who is accused of mass murder. And so it's a dual mystery. On the one hand, she has to sort of work out who she is, why she's there, why she's lost all of her memories. And then on the other hand, she's got to work out how she's going to defend the person in the dock. The crime that he's accused of, as I say, is mass murder. And in particular, it's terrorist attack on a government building in Birmingham. His motivations are said to be that he has these far-right racist views and that he was part of this proscribed organisation. And so, yeah, that's the sort of a little entry point into this one of the rabbit holes I went down.
Wow. Is it a little bit like Quantum Leap? Is anyone remembering that program? Where Samuel Beckett leaps into the life of somebody and then has to suddenly figure everything out.
There was a new series, on Paramount, I think.
I tried it. It didn't live up to how much I liked the first series. Yeah.
I suspect the book is not Quantum Leap related, though.
No.
Yeah, it's more, I would say, Black Mirror-y. There are a couple of heroes
Ooh.
in Black Mirror. And so, yeah, it's kind of a bit political as well, I guess, in some respects. And that's partly why I wanted to choose a political crime. I can't talk about the reason why I chose these particular types of crimes in too much detail because it would potentially give away the twist. But I wanted to do a case which was controversial and that had the potential to generate conspiracy theories. So I sort of knew the beginning of the book, the coming round in the courtroom. I knew the ending of the book and as to why she's there and things. And then what I had to do is try and construct the trial, what crime was going to be committed and what was she going to have to defend. And that's where I sort of started my research. I went on to a couple of podcasts and just did the kind of research that's not really looking in particular at how something's done or the facts and figures, but is more kind of trying to find some inspiration for different things. And the first thing I came across where I thought, oh, that has real potential to be a good trial was the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995.
Yes, that was a rabbit hole that I've been down in preparation. I have to say, I've been down a few rabbit holes, and I have to say this was one of the well, I'm going to say least pleasant, not saying that researching true crime is always the most pleasant thing in the world, but this really awful case Is it 168 people lost their lives?
Yeah, and many more injured, and a large proportion of that was children. Because the sad thing about, so it took place in Oklahoma, in the Alfred P. Murrah building, which is a federal government building. It housed other government services like the DEA, which is the Drug and Enforcement Administration, and the FBI, and the ATF, which is the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms. But there was also a nursery effectively in the building, and you can see this nursery from the outside apparently. And yeah, most of a lot of the victims were these children. So yeah, it's really grim. And one of the sort of key, like one of the most famous pictures arising from it is a fireman who's just carrying this little girl away from the sort of devastation of the bomb. So yeah, it's really grim. So that was something I thought, okay, this is interesting. And what interested me about it is because this guy Timothy McVeigh, who committed the crime, he was part of this far right militia movement. There's all of this interest on the part of the far right to sort of try and make out that, okay, yeah, we've got all of these views, but we weren't responsible for this, because I think they knew that this was publicly condemned and everybody thought it was pretty horrible. And so there's this real attempt to go, well, okay, we stand for all of the things that Timothy McVeigh stands for, but we don't stand for the bombing. And so they would try everything they could to try and make out this guy was a patsy. And now, like, when I was researching into the case, I wasn't necessarily doing it with the intention of trying to work out what actually happened. I was just trying to find like ideas for my book. But one of the things I came across were all of these different conspiracy theories. Like, there's this person called John Doe 2 who was seen going away from the building after the bombing, and there's a thought that this person might have been involved. Timothy McVeigh was also linked to this sort of neo-Nazi compound in Elohim City. And there was this guy that was living there, Strassmeyer his name is. He was connected with that group, and he was himself on death row, due to be executed. And he said on the day of his execution, April the 19th, something awful would happen. So yeah, so there's all of this potential. The two sort of people that were involved in it, which is Timothy McVeigh and his friend Terry Nichols. I mean, they were the people convicted of it. A couple of other people knew about it, but really it was these two. But I mean, it is possible that there were other people that knew about it, but it sort of doesn't matter. They ultimately deserve to have been, convicted for what they did. Whether or not they were part of a wider organisation, to my mind, doesn't really matter. It'd be better, obviously, if those other people were convicted as well, but the FBI, I guess, were just going on the evidence they had. But yeah, that's sort of where the conspiracies came from, and that's where I sort of started to get interested.
I think there's always all those kind of conspiracies, isn't there, when any case like this comes up, because it's such a major disaster, and it's such a, forgive the term, a big splash, so to speak, and there's always people that want to claim credit for it. So it's quite surprising that they didn't really want to claim credit for it.
It was Strassmeyer was this guy who was this neo-Nazi at this compound, but it was this guy called Richard Snell who was executed, and he said that on the day of his execution, something bad would happen. But and so there's this whole idea that other people were involved. I mean, the most extreme conspiracy theory is that it was a sort of inside job, and that the government did it to try and be able to bring in harsher gun control laws. And then there were other ideas that it was potentially had the sort of Islamic fundamentalist aspect of it. There's absolutely no evidence of that. The only evidence as such is this John Doe 2, who's been described by some people as looking a bit Mediterranean. That is literally the extent of the sort of connection there. And initially it was blamed on Islamic fundamentalists in the press, until they realised that the date on which this happened was telling, because it was the 19th of April. It was the 2-year anniversary of the end of something, which was the Waco siege, which is covered in John Ronson's book Them, which is brilliant. I would really recommend it to everybody, when he talks about all of these different organisations that have this belief in the New World Order, which is an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. And these people, it was called the Branch Davidian. It was basically a cult, and the US Marshals tried to sort of storm the compound where they all were, and it ended on April the 19th. And Timothy McVeigh was somebody who's very, very concerned about this. And so, as soon as they sort of realised that the date was pretty interesting, they realised it must have been a white supremacist as opposed to the initial group of people who were blamed by the press.
It's kind of similar. I mean, when you look at kind of the far right and it's almost like a genre of book. There's a lot of subgenres, isn't there, within it? Because I've looked at incels in the past.
Oh yeah.
You've looked into them as well?
I came across them sort of almost incidentally. So when I was at uni, a friend of mine, a male friend of mine, said, "Have you heard of this thing called The Game?" And I said, "Oh, no, not really." And we'd heard these terms like peacocking and negging and things like this. And he was like, "Well, I've read it, and look, like my advice to you is to read it as sort of self-defense, if nothing else." And so I sort of, I picked it up and I read it, and I would say that purely for being able to spot sort of toxic behavior in men, it is quite a useful sort of handbook. Yeah, I kind of like was interested in this whole pickup artist sort of organization that's described in the book. And through that, I found out that there were these people called incels and their beliefs in women. And the book is pretty problematic, as I've sort of alluded to. It refers to this idea of the whole sort of way that men should be picking up women is basically to try and make the woman feel like they've got less value, so they will sleep with a man who they wouldn't otherwise sleep with. That's the basic premise of pickup artistry. And linked to this, as I say, was this incel culture. And so I really just sort of came across it incidentally. And then, yeah, from there, it's just grown and become this sort of really problematic thing that I didn't realise was going to get as bad as it's got with Andrew Tate and so on.
I mean, as a woman, it's scary, isn't it, Lisa?
Oh, it's terrifying. And as you say, we've talked about this before, haven't we? But kind of social media has a big old role to play in terms of how that content all becomes more accessible. And because of the algorithm, you view some of that content and it goes, "Oh, you like that? Let's give you more of that content and more of that content." And it's very easy it's almost like an enforced rabbit hole somebody could fall down where that information isn't correct and isn't safe information to be receiving.
And the YouTube algorithm does push people into it. So it will start off with, maybe, I don't know, someone looks up some pickup, techniques, how to sort of get more confidence. And it starts off very, very, this is how you get more confidence. This is how to talk to women. And then it will send you down a rabbit hole of this sort of idea of negging and all of this. And then before you know it, you're talking about women, and how they sort of, they are just vessels for sex, basically. And it's mad how the algorithm kind of pushes people down that rabbit hole.
It eventually dehumanizes women. That's the kind of takeaway that I took from reading about it. A friend of mine, Jane Isaac, she's been on here. She had an incel in one of her books, so she did a lot of research into it. And it's just absolutely terrifying. You're right. I read it, and that you've got men that are just, that they're probably a little bit introverted. They can't really talk to women. They don't really know what they're doing. And instead of being taught proper skills like communication skills and respect, they're being taught that all women are Stacys that are good looking and therefore need to be, and any good looking men, I think they call them, is it Brads or something?
Yeah.
And it's just absolutely ridiculous. It's just like another excuse for them to, to blame everyone else but themselves, that their life isn't going as they wanted it to.
Yeah, and to blame feminism, which is sort of interesting because when you think about it, you would think that the sort of liberation that happens with contraceptives and so on, and let's not call each other sluts, that would sort of open up, the ability of these people who want to have sex to be able to have free sex. But how they see it actually is that, no, this hasn't helped us, because all it's allowed is for women to have more sex with the people they want to have with. What it's not done is force them to have sex with us. And Timothy McVeigh as well, like going back to him, he I don't think they had the language necessarily of incel back then, but he certainly has, kind of a few of those traits. As a teenager, it looks like he wasn't really able to get a girlfriend and was sort of bullied, and turned to guns as a sort of way of expressing his masculinity.
Yeah, and again, that's then falling into the whole school shooting thing, isn't it? I mean, Columbine, and
Yeah.
the kind of, if they don't want me, I'm going to make sure that nobody wants them, that they can't want anybody else. It's that kind of mentality of I'm the protagonist of my own revenge piece. And I think that it's definitely played upon in the incel culture, and very much in the far right. Everything else is someone else's problem. If you're not them, then everything's your problem. And I think that's how a lot of it, I suppose, grabbed. It's again like a cult. Again, we've spoken about cults before, but it's almost like a cult. You say what someone wants to hear, e.g., all the problems in your life are actually stemming from somebody else or some people, and therefore, if we get rid of these people somehow, or we can control the women, then you will have a much better life. And that's how they get their peeps, not their peeps. They
Yeah.
get their members. No, that's worse.
I'm not going to try and come in on this because I'm sure I'd say something very inappropriate. What I was going to kind of go
Followers.
followers,
They get their followers. There you go. Minions, even better.
Although a little bit cute and fluffy and yellow now,
Yeah,
considering
dungarees.
that the film has taken us in that direction. I was going to go slightly back to John Doe too, because I was intrigued by some of the theories around that when I was looking. Did you look at the left leg, just to get a bit grim again? But
Yeah.
did you hear about the left leg in your research?
Yeah, and basically the left leg is that people were thinking, aha, there was somebody else, but they haven't been able to match this leg to another body and things like that. That was another sort of that was another sort of conspiracy theory that people had.
This unclaimed left leg, and then it got embalmed, I think, so they were unable to take any DNA or anything from it. And there were lots of witness statements suggesting that when McVeigh was doing some of the preparation, because I suppose that's the other thing, to do this on your own. I mean, you said you didn't really look at sort of into necessarily details of it, but they created a bomb in the back of a truck out of fertilizer, explosives, and fuel. And to get hold of all of those things and do that and balance it, park it, time it, set up all the timers and things like that, it's like, that's a lot of work. That's like a real, for somebody to do that solo, or for two people supposedly to have done all of that.
Yeah, that is as I say, there is potentially someone else helping them here, because there is a level of sophistication which is not carried through to when they actually try to do it. So the plan was to actually take the Ryder truck underneath the Alfred P. Murrah building into the underground car park, which would have been even more devastating. But what they didn't realise is the Ryder truck wouldn't fit underneath the barrier. Like, this is what we're dealing with. So there is a sort of mismatch between the sort of sophistication of the bomb that had been created and their like total inability to execute it properly, or the stupid stuff they do afterwards. Like, he literally like almost gets caught by the FBI at one point. It's just it is mad. But what I would say about that is that what the conspiracy theorists say therefore is, aha, this guy is just a fall guy, he's a patsy. And it's like, well, okay, so maybe he got help from other people, but he still drove that Ryder truck to that building and decided to murder all of those people.
And he stood by it as well, didn't he? He said in statements afterwards he was just considered people to be collateral damage. He didn't,
Totally.
in his war, in his mind, what he was doing was still absolutely justified. And he was in some way at war, I think, with himself, but with the government. He was trying to start a war. I think another one that was mentioned that you'd looked into was the London nail bombings.
Yes, yeah. So looking into the Oklahoma City bombing case kind of took me into the London nail bombings. There were lots of podcasts about the Oklahoma City bombing. I listened to pretty much all of them. Again, like even ones that you wouldn't say are terribly, how do I put it? They're not well researched or anything like that. They're just some guys talking. And there was some really weird stuff said in there. But I was just interested in why people think the way they do about these things. So, but there were not that many podcasts at the time about the London nail bombings, but I did come across one and I listened to it, and it was interesting. So this man, David Copeland. This was in 1999, and again, something that interested me was that these two cases, there's so many similarities between them, and they both take place in the 90s. So David Copeland, actually, he did 3 bombings, and they were nail bombs. The first one was Electric Avenue in Brixton, obviously, which is known as a famously quite a sort of black area in London. The second area then was an area which is largely known to be Bangladeshi.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally he went to a pub in Soho, which is obviously again known as where gay people might go to, and that's where he finally murdered people, but obviously injured and all sorts of people along the way. And there's a horrible picture of from the Brixton bombing of a nail embedded into a little boy's head. So it's really, really horrible. Again, absolutely horrible. David Copeland hung around the BNP. The thing with the BNP, right, is that they're the sort of, or at the time they were the sort of like corporate face of the far right. So they, you get these people, you get people at the time Nick Griffin wasn't in charge, but you can get these people who can go on to Question Time or whatever, and they can just about manage not to say something too horrific for a long enough period of time that the BBC will put them on. But what would happen is that they have shoot off, like these are the groups that shoot off from it. So one of them is Combat 18,
Mm-hmm.
Y18, 18, because those are the letters in the alphabet for AH, Adolf Hitler. Basically were the sort of security arm of the BNP. So when they did their rallies and things, they would turn up and be the sort of heavies. And what would happen at these things, they would, the BNP would meet in these pubs and they would talk about, immigration and all these horrible things, but they would do it again in that way that is just kind of above the line that they're not going to get shut down. But what would happen after that is that people would then hand out lists of like key politicians they wanted to execute. And so more really like problematic and dangerous material would get handed out at these sort of events. And so he sort of gets into all of that. He also, again, has got all of these sort of like slightly incel behaviours, again, not really able to get women. There's also, he has in the past worried about whether he might be gay. And the reason for that is because when they used to watch the Flintstones as a kid, he used to say, they used to sing along, have a gay old time. And he was worried that his parents were subliminally forcing him to be gay. Which, again, I think is interesting because the third set of victims he chose was a gay club.
I thought you were going to say that he fancied Barney Rubble or something over Becky. But that's even worse.
There's a whole generation, isn't there, that are now homosexual and run around in their cars without their shoes on, all due to the Flintstones, obviously.
Having a gay old time.
Well, something about both David Copeland and Timothy McVeigh is that they both read the Turner Diaries, which, when I looked into it, this is terrifying. So it's a novel written by William Luther Pierce, who was a known neo-Nazi in 1978. And hasn't it been linked to at least 200, I think, potential deaths that might have been where, the person who's done it has read that book?
Yeah, it's almost like a to-do book of how to do a terrorist attack. So he'd read the Turner Diaries. Something else I'll come on to later is he'd read this book called The Aryan Guide to Revolution, and that sort of linked into a whole other rabbit hole I went down. But yeah, so they both had read the same things, as you say, these Turner Diaries. They were both pretty disenfranchised white men who believed the reason they weren't able to get a job had nothing to do with their own sort of deficiencies in social communication and ability to sort of make friends, but because of foreign people. They both believed in violence as the means of curing that. And again, the trial of David Copeland is surrounded by conspiracy theories, and there are more interesting things, I would say, in the David Copeland case. I think in the Timothy McVeigh case, to me, it's all a bit kind of people are grasping at straws. Whereas in the Timothy McVeigh case, I do think that obviously he did it. Sorry, in the David Copeland case, obviously he did it. I do think that we will never know the full story though. Because there were just some interesting bits. Again, the sophistication of the bombs in relation to his ability to actually place them. For example, he was, I think in the second bombing, he actually put it in the wrong place because he meant to do it. He wanted to do it on the day of a sort of a market, but got the wrong day. And again, they were timed, these bombs. They had these quite sophisticated timing mechanisms. And when the plan had to change, he couldn't amend the timer. So there were all of those sorts of strange things. There were far-right groups that took credit for the attack. And then one of the more interesting things that I found was that there was something in the paper ahead of the third bombing, which again was the lethal one, and it was in the Pink paper, which is an LGBT magazine, saying that gays on fascist bomb alert. Gay communities around the country were on bomb alert this week after a fascist group detonated its second nail bomb in London last weekend. Now, what I find quite interesting about that is that you wouldn't necessarily think that, okay, so this guy's gone for a black area, a Bangladeshi area. What you might think that they might go for next is a Jewish community, but it was but gay people were put specifically on alert by, it appears, MI5. And so there is a question as to whether there had been some guessing on the part of the security services as to whether he was going to attack another place. And what we found out later is that there was actually an insider who was able to identify David Copeland from some CCTV that was released.
Is that Arthur?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now that is fascinating. Have you watched the Netflix documentary?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Which kind of was like, when you were talking that he was a little bit unsophisticated, it kind of made me laugh with those brilliant guys from the market at the beginning who were talking about, I got it out the bag and I was holding the bomb. And then they talked about how it, even they knew it was a bomb because of the
Yeah.
wires coming out of it and the way it looked almost like the kind of almost cartoon bomb that you would expect it to look at. But yes, that's a brilliant documentary. I've got a bit of a high horse I want to get up on about McVeigh and Copeland. We're running out of time.
We are running out of time for this first episode, so maybe you can promise us, Lisa, that in the next one that you will ride that high horse.
I'm going to go and get my soapbox right now, and I'm going to bring it to the middle of
Not your saddle.
my high horse. My
Yeah.
really high horse. It's like a child's drawn. It's got really long legs.
And we'll see if we'll join you on the canter. Okay?
Okay, come on then.
We want to thank LJ Shepherd, also known as Laura, by the way, on her website. All the links to her book will be down in the show note. It's available in paperback and ebook and audio, I believe, Laura, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, it's on Audible.
It will be on BorrowBox, if you're with them.
Yes, it's on BorrowBox, Audible, Spotify, all of the usual Audible place or audio places.
Excellent. So we will keep you for the week, if that's all right. We'll trap you down the rabbit hole. We have promised to feed guests, haven't we? And we do have a bit of a menu going. We've set up a coffee machine.
Lovely.
Yeah, coffee machine. We've not gone beyond the crust of bread yet.
No,
sorry.
but we are paying for Netflix. So
yeah, we can all sit and watch Manhunt together.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us, listeners. Do remember to follow the Red Rabbit on all the social medias. And remember, we have a Patreon page where if you can't wait to see or hear Lisa on her high horse, then you can get the next episode.
I haven't got any coconut shells.
No,
I
you
should have kept
should.
some coconuts.
They're
at all
definitely an
times.
investment, really, for
I
the show.
haven't.
You can sign up to our Patreon and get the next episode early, along with lots of other bonus content. We will see you all next time. Bye, listeners.
See you soon. Bye.